David and Goliath. It's one of the most well-known stories in the entire Bible. It's been depicted in movies, printed on t-shirts, acted out by vegetables. It's the classic story of good versus evil, of the weak versus the strong. Well, not long ago, archaeologists uncovered proof of where these events actually took place. And we're going to take you there in this episode of Inside the Holy Land. Now, before we start, if you're interested in learning more insights that will help you to understand the Bible more clearly and see it with an entirely new set of eyes, then make sure to click the link above and down in the description, where you can download a free book I wrote called 10 Words That Will Change the Way You Read the Bible. It's a quick but powerful read that will teach you a whole lot in just a short period of time, just like this video. Speaking of, let's dive in. The first question when it comes to locating the site of David and Goliath's epic battle has always been, where do we start? While Israel isn't a large nation, to try to find something as specific as this would be like trying to find a needle in a haystack. So the first thing archaeologists would do is look to Scripture. Can the Bible give us clues about where to look? And that answer is absolutely. You see, the story of David and Goliath comes from the Old Testament book of 1 Samuel. And in the very first verse of chapter 17, we learn some key details about the location of the battle between David and Goliath. Verse 1 of 1 Samuel 17 says, "Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Soko in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Dammim between Soko and Azekah." So in just one verse, the biblical author hits you with about 5 different geographical references that would have been quite familiar to people living at the time that this was written, but are foreign to most of us today, even to some archaeologists. So where exactly are these places and what do they tell us? Well, the first location mentioned in verse 1 is Soko in Judah. Judah is a reference to the southern portion of the Holy Land. At the time of David, it was situated next to Philistia, which, as you might imagine, was the land of the Philistines. So just from these 2 details, we can quickly narrow our search for the battle site of David and Goliath. But let's not forget that other location that was mentioned, Soko. Soko was an ancient town that sat atop a hill overlooking the Valley of Elah. But it's not the only hilltop city mentioned in this verse. The author also mentions Azekah. This city was located farther north and also served as an important location from which to observe and protect the Valley of Elah. And what Scripture tells us is that the Philistine camp was between these 2 locations at a site called Ephes Dammim. Now, this is where things get a little more complicated. While Soko and Azekah are easily identifiable, Ephes Dammim is not. The phrase in Hebrew literally means border of blood. And in a region like this, that could be anywhere. You see, Soko, Azekah, and all of these other sites mentioned in the story of David and Goliath are in a region of Israel called the Shephelah. This was a lowland area of Israel that was relatively flat, which made it a perfect place for battles. Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and other scriptures all tell of different battles in the Shephelah. It was the site of incredible bloodshed, and it was the perfect place for a battle between Israel and the Philistines. And as we continue reading, we gain even more clues that help us to discern the specific location of this battle. Verses 2 and 3 say, "Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the Valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley between them." So given our knowledge that the Philistines are encamped somewhere between Soko and Azekah, and now armed with this new information about the Valley of Elah, we can generally assume that the Philistines were encamped somewhere to the west, and the Israelites were encamped to the east. Now, at this point in 1 Samuel, the narrative shifts away from locations and begins to describe the events that unfold. Goliath demands a challenger, David eventually volunteers, and with a few stones, a slingshot, and a sword, David slays Goliath. For most people, this is where they stop reading, right? The exciting parts of the story are over, and all that's left are some mundane details. But if we're willing to explore those mundane details, they give us even more clues about the location of this battle. You see, later in chapter 17, it says, "When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Sha'araim road to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. And when we put those locations on a map, what we begin to see is that once the Philistines are defeated, they begin to flee. They head west through the valley of Elah back toward Philistia. And as they're fleeing, they retreat to the towns of Gath and Ekron. But then there's this other strange clue included in there. It says that they travel along the Sha'araim road. Now, for centuries, this phrase baffled archaeologists, right? They couldn't determine where the Sha'araim road was, or even a city or town called Sha'araim. That is until the last 10 to 15 years, when archaeologists discovered something amazing. You see, just above the valley of Elah, on the side where the Israelites would have encamped, there is an archaeological site called Kirvet Kaiafa. On this site, there are the ruins of an ancient military fortress. You can see a casemate wall, a double wall where the outside protective wall is separate from the inner city wall, affording a fortress greater protection. And as you walk through the city, you notice something strange and unique. On one side of the city, there's a gate, an obvious entrance into the fortress. And on the other side, there's another gate. This isn't normal. Kirvet Kaiafa is a military fortress. The last thing you would want in your military fortress are two gates. Gates are the weakest and most vulnerable parts of a fortress. It was incredibly rare to find a fortress with two gates. But then archaeologists realized something. A clue that had been in the text the entire time, something that for so long made so little sense, but now made things perfectly clear. Because you see, the word Sha'araim, that random road mentioned in verse 52, Sha'araim means two gates. Archaeologists realized that they had uncovered the ancient fortress of Sha'araim. And since then, many archaeologists have come to believe that Sha'araim was actually a fortress built by King Saul, which means that when you are standing in Sha'araim, you are very likely standing in the very spot that Saul stood, looking down at the exact location where David slew Goliath. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, if you haven't done so already, make sure to download my free book, 10 Words That Will Change the Way You Read the Bible. You can find the link up here or down in the description. And if you'd like to see another video that will change how you see the Holy Land, then click this box right here. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.